A warm welcome to the Authentic Pathways podcast. I'm Karin Holley, a certified coach who specializes in burnout prevention, sustainable high performance, and authentic leadership. For this podcast, I interview inspiring leaders who are aligned with their values and they're able to show up as themselves and therefore have meaningful impact in the community that they operate in. One of the ways to prevent burnout is to make sure your behaviors at home and at work reflect your values, your personal mission, and your strengths. When there is a misalignment, we can manage that for a while, but there is this underlying tension and stress, and it can start to accumulate, and we feel less authentic. And then that negatively can impact our well being, our relationships, and our performance. So, to dive deeper into the power of value aligned living and working authentically, I've invited Dr. Debra Lane today. She has been an educator for more than 30 years as a teacher and administrator in the US and internationally. In addition to working in schools, she's taught undergraduate and graduate classes at George Mason University and the University of Virginia. She's been involved with adult learning, has presented at numerous international conferences, and Dr. Lane has also participated in accreditation teams with the Western Association of Schools and Colleges. She was nominated as Virginia Principal of the Year and won the Chesapeake Bay Foundation Educator of the Year award. She has served as a board member with 8 different organizations, and this past year, she decided to go back overseas and work as the director of programming and training for Peace Corps in Vietnam. She has published 2 books, Raise Her Up with co-author Kimberly Cullen and Building Inclusive Leadership Beyond the Gender Binary with Dr. Anne Marie Luce. Deborah, a really warm welcome to you. When I think of you, I think of someone who has so much integrity and so much passion for what you believe in. To get our conversation started, and the theme for this session together is the leadership that is aligned with your values. I wanted to start with, what are a few of your top core values and how have they impacted this career path that is really quite unique?
Thank you so much, Karen, for having me on your podcast. I was thinking about when we first met, I think in Dusseldorf, Germany, at an ECIS conference. It's so wonderful to be on with you here from Vietnam in Hanoi and you being in the Netherlands. I would say when I think of my core values, I look at the strengths that Dr. Martin Seligman has a famous survey out of University of Pennsylvania. And I have taken this survey 3 or 4 different times in the last 15 years. And they have one for children as well, and it's free. And my core strengths have not changed. The number one strength has been appreciation of beauty. It's definitely a grounding for me around not only being in beautiful settings, and beautiful settings can be something quite simplistic, like today I just had some bougainvillea delivered to the house so that when you come to my door on Thanksgiving, this beautiful bougainvillea at the doorway. And it just creates this welcoming atmosphere when you come into my home. It can also be an appreciation of beauty in people where you're noticing people's strengths and just sitting back and really listening to others and noticing what their strengths are. We have a common friend that we both adore, Bridget McNair, who runs Sidecar Council. And I think of Bridget often. She feels we connect over our appreciation of beauty. And she often brings this beautiful kind of creative side that she pulls out of me when we talk. I don't see myself as a creative person, but all of a sudden this creativity happens. And so I think that's just such a beautiful thing between us. Also, another value that I have is a sense of ethics around just finding truth in situations. I'm definitely struggling with some of this AI that's happening in our world as far as just the ethical use of it and trying to understand. I know we all use it. So how do we continue to stay open about AI, but how do we also use it in an ethical way? I have a lot of curiosity around, especially gender equity with AI and how it's being built. I just had a conversation this morning over coffee with a Gen Z that's working remotely here in Vietnam, staying with me, a friend, son, and he is working for an AI group in insurance. And he is struggling with the use of AI as well. And he knows it's going to be needed. And we were talking about coming from Virginia, where many of the data centers are being stored, and how electricity are going up. Just having these conversations around the value, the ethics of it, and then having humility, being humble is really important in this world with all the crazy that's going on, and trying to stay connected in a humanistic way while we're trying to put down our electronics and present for one another. This is an area that I really feels very important. And I'm trying to check myself around that right now.
Thank you, Deb, for sharing those two values, appreciation of beauty that you're finding in the spaces around you, plus in the people that you surround yourself with. And you do that by really listening. I think that is so valuable. When I speak with more experienced leaders, that's probably one of the first things they say is their ability to listen. And you're listening for strengths in people. And I think that's beautiful because in theory, our brains go to looking at weaknesses and looking for problems. And you're being very intentional about looking for strengths in people. I think that's really powerful. And then regarding the ethics and how AI is confronting us with these questions of how are we using it? What's the data that's being provided in the algorithms related to gender and other issues? It is indeed very interesting and maybe like almost a separate podcast we could just do on AI. I'm curious about the humility and staying humble. And you said amidst all the crazy, right? To be present for one another. What does being humble have to do with being present and staying connected?
I think I learned this when I was taking cognitive coaching, the act of listening and really knowing when to pause. You do a good job of this, Karin. When to pause,
Thank you.
when to listen for those little kernels or nuggets of information. Because sometimes when we're communicating, there may be a word or a phrase we're using that in coaching, you listening for that. The person that's speaking might not realize that this is like a truth that needs to be discovered or opened up about someone, where you need to explore and ask some deeper questioning. In coaching, I think that often we have the answers ourselves, but we need to explore what those answers are for ourselves. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. This is my work. So yes. But so what does staying humble though have to do then with this ability to listen for those hidden truths that you're trying to bring to light in people?
I think the younger Debbie Lane or Dr. Lane version of myself, constantly trying to find a way to connect with people. So I'd start bringing up my own experience and paralleling that with someone else when actually it was nothing like that for that person. And I think there was some situation where I was coaching someone and I did it not intentionally. And then I caught myself like, I keep trying to connect with that person by acting as though I've been through something or I understand them because I've been through it. When on many levels, I really haven't, I'm not that person. I haven't walked in their shoes. So I kind of need to check myself at the door and really just be present. I know it sounds really simplistic, but be there for the person and really listen to what they're going through. When Anne-Marie and I were writing our book, there were a couple of experiences, and writing a book with someone and collaborating, it takes a lot. You have to go in egoless. You have to be a collaborator. You have to be with one another about what's working and what's not. we were gathering stories, very similar to my first book with Kim Cullen, where we were gathering stories. And we may have a difference in how we're hearing that story. So when we go to edit or we send it off to the editor or the publisher, we need to be sure we're capturing the story and not letting ourselves get into that story. So there were times as authors, we were checking ourselves. We got to humble ourselves and let the writer write, let them speak. We might not agree with how this was written, but we have to let them have it with their own voice. So staying humble around checking yourself around that. There's a time and place where you can talk about yourself, but it might not be in those instances. I hope that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I agree with you. I see that even in my younger daughters, like when they have friends over, they're trying to connect with talking almost above each other or in a way that, oh, yeah, me too. And this was my experience. And me too. And that was my experience. What you're saying is that the humility of showing up as a leader is by parking your own ego somewhere, as you say, kind of checking yourself. It isn't about you. It's about the other person and being fully present for them and listening to them. And I think that's such a beautiful way of describing it. I've never thought of it as being humble. I think a lot of people might interpret that you are being humble because you're not talking about yourself, you know? If I reflect on myself when I go to networking events and things like that, I don't like talking about myself because I know myself already. It's not that interesting for me. I like asking the questions. I like being curious about other people because then I learn something new or I get inspired. I feel like I'm being quite selfish by enjoying the stories of other people. And yet I do know that in my business and even as a coach, people do need to know who I am and what I stand for. What is my platform then? What is my space to assert myself, to find my voice? So on the one hand, you're leading right now Vietnam, all these volunteer, Peace Corps, you're practicing this listening and being fully present. And then where do you switch to now is my turn to say what we're doing or this is the strategy?
So it's interesting in my work now, it's so similar to, I think, being a principal. I always thought in a principal, you think of this triangle where you have your teaching staff, you have your students, and you have your parents. And so you're answering to all three parties and you're juggling. Sometimes the students take up more time, sometimes the parents take up a lot of time, and sometimes the staff take up a lot of time. Sometimes they all take up a lot of time. It's rare that none of them take up no time. And as I'm working in this realm, so we have Peace Corps volunteers throughout the country, and they're my clients in some regard. They're my students. And I also have to work with my staff, who in some ways are also my client because I'm the US representative and we have about 21 local staff. So I'm constantly in that part of the triangle weighing local entities and culture, as well as pushing myself out there, representing the youth ethics and values and rules, which can be very confusing to the Vietnamese. You know, tomorrow they have Thanksgiving off and they're like, what is Thanksgiving? So I was spending today explaining, they're like, this is so interesting. You know, we don't have a day like this, but we have other things, you know, that we do here in the country. And then that last group is the government. We have to work very closely, not only with the Ministry of Education, but also the local ministries of education out and agree upon having these volunteers in their schools to teach English. And that in and of itself, like this past summer, that took up 80% of my time, meeting with government, making diplomatic agreements, involving lawyers to get the papers signed. We have a binding agreement with the country of Vietnam, both from the economic and political sense, as well as from education. So it's quite complicated. And I really enjoyed working with all of that. Getting back to your question, I'm trying to remember the beginning of the question. Well,
It was about being humble, right? So your value of being humble and you bringing this ability to listen and find the strengths in other people. It's also the beauty in other people and the beauty in situations. How do you bring that then to your work, your current work? But also, I guess the flip side of it, when do you assert yourself and say, now this is my experience and this is the way we need to go?
so yes, there is the smiling and laughing in my head because there are times I've had to be, this is what's going to happen, where you lower the boom on policy, boundaries. I mean, a collaborative decision with staff, but we've had to send volunteers home for not following policy. And that's when the volunteers call me Principal Deb. And I don't love that term at all. They know I don't love it. They also call me Dash Deb because they see me like running around and sending out, diplomatic agreements and meeting with them and flying down to Ho Chi Minh and meeting with the group down there. So it's a lot of energy to the job. And I do love the humility and humbleness in the job, in that you have to connect with the culture. You have to take time. I don't sit down and tell them my resume or the books that I've written. It's the ones on staff that'll come to me curious because they've done, I don't know, they've found LinkedIn or they've looked at something I've done and they come to me privately. And this is part of the culture too. Like, oh, I know you've done this, and sit down over a cup of tea. And if you have questions, we'll talk about it. I had a staff member today that said, I heard you tell one of the volunteers that you are a death doula. I have my license to be a death doula because when my mom was dying, I really wanted to understand the process of dying. So I got licensed as a death doula in an international program. I have not gone out and practiced. It's something I think later in my life I would like to do, be very present in the process and help a family or friends through someone's end of life. And it can be a very beautiful experience.
Wow, that gives me the
And
chill. Wow.
the staff member came to me today and said, we don't have this practice in Vietnam. I'd really like to know more about it. And I was explaining to her just about it. Those are times where I feel like I can have that humility of, these are some things I've experienced. If you're curious, let's talk on a one-on-one where I can be really present with you, whether it's we're traveling and sitting together on a 2-hour flight or on a 6-hour car ride. I love leaning into the culture and understanding the why and the how we get to a decision, and how can I provide my Americanness or my leadership skills or my coaching skills around how can we get to a little bit of a different answer and keep working on the program and improving it. Right now, we have a very difficult situation where the government has approved for Peace Corps to be here. It took us 18 years to get in the country. We've been here 5 years. We have our 4th group here, but I'm constantly telling our trainees and our volunteers, everything you do, you're representing the US government. And sometimes it's a huge weight for them. The agreement included that they had to live in the public school. But the problem with that is many of the gates get locked anywhere from 6 to 9 o'clock at night. And then the guards let out their guard dogs. And the guard dogs walk around the school. And it's a very isolating process experience for our trainees. And it's something we're trying to work on. We've taken the Vietnamese government to Morocco to show them a surveilled governance Peace Corps and how those Peace Corps volunteers live outside of the school. They still volunteer and teach English in the schools, but they live in the community. The government's not there yet. And I see this as a big duty and experience that I hope we can keep kind of peeling back the onion. And, over time, our volunteers can live in the communities and outside of the schools. But for now, it's my job to really share with the trainees and volunteers that sign up. This is what you're signing up for. We're going to be here to support you, but this is what you're signing up for.
Wow. That's an amazing example of culture and the cultural differences, right? And you have lived internationally, and yes, you are representing not only US values, but US government right now, where ethics is very important. And no matter what you do, whether it's you're out dancing in a bar or you're volunteering at the school, you are representing the US government. In all your travels and working overseas and internationally, and you describe even the humbleness that you bring then to learning about all these different cultures. Do you get a sense though that there are, I guess, some universal values in all of the cultures, or are they vastly different?
Yes and no, yin and yang. When I talk about humility, I see humility every day in Vietnam, in our work. The culture honors a sense of formalness around things. Always go into a school, you sit down and there's long greetings, then there's green tea. You don't talk about surfacey things or the weather. It takes a while to get to, and you might not even hear what's really going on until after you visited a school. It'll happen a couple days later. So there are things like that while in the US where it can be very abrupt or just straightforward and direct over situation. And it was similar in China where there's like this grace and formality, and you sit down and nothing is rushed, which there's a part of me that loves that. You take the dash Deb who needs to be, taking some time to step back and just be present, be there. These are areas that I'm learning to appreciate and love. I mean, it's taken me into my 50s to learn some of these things. My earlier thinking of values, my earlier values, perseverance was like number 2. Persevere. And this could be an age and wisdom thing of allowing perseverance maybe to take a back seat at this point. I found this beautiful quote that Brene Brown wrote at the end of her book on grounding, most recent book. And she writes about curiosity and humility, and the connections are really important around that curiosity and humanity, because she talks about the AI world and the concerns, and she talks about social media and the obsession with social media. And she says this is the poetry of being human, that it's almost like this braiding that goes on. And I think it's important as we're trying to work on that groundedness of what keeps us human, that this is a skill that's going to be, I think, valued more. It's not getting a lot of attention, and it needs to. I just went to the grocery store at a latte, packed on a Sunday. I don't know what I was thinking, but I couldn't get around. People are on their phones and like just standing in an aisle, not aware of people trying to pass them. It was a very frustrating experience. And I got in the taxi and I was thinking, wow, first of all, I could have gone at a different hour, not on a Sunday afternoon, but I was also just mystified at how many people, I mean, I'd say it was like 75% of people were on their phones in the grocery store, could not put their phones down. It's really interesting.
Super interesting. And I think, as you say, to be grounded, have that as a skill. It's a muscle, actually, that we need to develop, right? This ability to be fully present when we're in conversation with people, when we are in traffic, when we're in the supermarket, just to notice what's going on around us, to be able to know, feel what the other person needs in the interaction. And you talked about, dash Deb and perseverance Deb. How do you nurture these qualities of being present, being grounded, not to dash all the time, to be able to observe? How intentional are you about that?
Getting better. I would not say it's my strength. And this could be where I've never been diagnosed, but I've self-diagnosed myself with ADHD, I'm sure. I know I became an empty nester and I went through my divorce. And so like I'm a standalone Deb now. I'm not, married Deb. I'm not as much mom Deb, principal Deb. So I've had more time, which is a gift. It's truly a gift of starting to recognize, wow, first of all, there's some things I need to work on, have my best values come out and work on my character around being present, my own well-being. I shared with you earlier, for the first time in my life, hired a physical trainer at the gym. I've stepped into gyms, but I would go into classes. I've never felt comfortable stepping into the weight arena. And when I was diagnosed with osteoarthritis at a very early age, I was told I need to start weightlifting. And it wasn't until I really came to Vietnam and had the time and hired a push trainer and a pull trainer. And they taught me that I was lifting weights wrong. If I go to lift a table, I'm using the weights in my shoulders because that's how I've always lifted things. And so they taught me how to use my back muscles more. And I'll be lifting the weights. I can't feel the back muscles. No, because they're really weak. You sit a lot of work, you haven't used those muscles. And when I opened up Brene Brown's book, and the first chapter was about her going through a similar thing where you have to connect your brain with the muscle you're trying to use. I had to shed everything else, whether I've had a good day, a bad day, whether, I don't know, like I had a good meal or not. Like I had to literally concentrate on using that back muscle. And the trainer putting their hand on the muscle to remind my brain that that's the muscle you have to use. It's that intentional around, putting your phone down or making yourself read for 30 minutes instead of scrolling, reaching out to, for me, it would be, especially in going through menopause and feeling lonely around that because she feels like her family doesn't understand her and she feels like she's going crazy. And asking that woman that's overseas, let's go out for tea or let's go have a coffee. I really want to hear what you're going through. I think it's really important that those are the connections where we're present and we're leaving the phone either in your purse or at the door in your backpack and being there. Those are the things I've been concentrating on. And I have the time, so I'm very fortunate.
But you're also being intentional. You could use your time very differently, as you say. You could be on your phone most of the time and you are deciding, no, I'm going to go to the gym, take care of my well-being, get stronger. It's also very interesting to me that you talk about this brain body connection and how you've taken on a certain physical shape. Your muscles have a certain strength or weakness, however they are, right? They just are a certain way. And that you're also now very intentionally making that mind body connection and getting uncomfortable, trying out new things. I love that as well in various capacities. Number one is as we're getting older, we definitely do not need to get stuck or stay complacent, right? We can keep growing, we can keep developing ourselves. I think that's one level. And the other one is how much of our stress and our life is packed in our body, right? We're carrying the scars, both sort of literally and figuratively, of our experiences in our body. Through the physical training, you're actually molding your body in a different way after so many years. What are you noticing as you're doing this in yourself, in your body, in your brain, in your mood, in your well-being? What changes are you noticing?
Well, there are definitely days I don't want to go to the gym and I'll say terrible things to my trainer and they laugh. Sometimes they teach me curse words in Vietnamese. Yesterday, I had to do 3 1-minute wall sits where you just put your back up against the wall and crouch down, and it's just a killer for your quads. By the second one, I was like, I just really don't like you. to the trainer. These guys are in their 20s and they're like, you have more energy than some of the 20-year-olds that we work with. And I do have a lot of energy. And I don't know if it's just this release on life a bit. There are many things I can't control, but the things I can control are within me. And that can be my energy, that can be what I eat, that can be what I think, what I read, what I work on and develop. You know, I want my back to look more sculpted than it looks right now. It looks like a typical 55-year-old woman. I want to live a healthier, continued healthy life. And by the end of the workout, what it teaches me is that I can do it. And I always leave there better. I always leave there, even when it's a terrible day, even when I say mean things in Vietnamese to them. But I just get shocked at how I feel better. I sleep better. And overall, I just feel better, you know? So it's like a simplistic thing, but making yourself get there is very hard.
But you're doing it. And as you say, we can do hard things. And how awesome that you're feeling more energy as a result. For me as well, I do daily workouts. Even when I don't feel like it, I show up because I always know that I will feel better. And it does help. Deb, I want to pivot a little bit to the books that you've written and maybe even your dissertation around, you know, being this champion, this ally for quote unquote the underdog in different scenarios or situation, being the champion of women, being the champion of kids who get bullied, being the champion of anyone who's not included in leadership or beyond the gender binary. What has inspired you to go down this path and be this champion and ally and make sure that things are written about it and you speak about it and bring it to your leadership?
You know, my childhood was a beautifully painted house, glass doors, wearing fancy clothes. So on the outside, we looked amazing. But I was raped by a family member at age 6. And I was the family member that came forth and immediately told my parents. And so when I look at myself, I see even at age 6, I had a very strong sense of ethics. I probably missed my calling going to law school, but I didn't miss my calling around advocating for children. I went to court many times to advocate for children who had been through terrible family situations, worked with a lot of psychologists, social workers. And to me, that's the hard work. So terrible, like reading the news right now for me, for many people. And so the work's never done, in my opinion. And I think that I watched family members get bullied by this man in our family who raped multiple generations, and people were scared to come out and say anything. And this family member had a lot of power, very smart, but yet charismatic. And I think that standing up for that and gathering people's stories to understand where people are coming from. I think everybody has a story. I think a lot of people have many stories, you know, that if we take the time to listen and really care for one another and nurture one another, it's essentially being human. And I think of like diverse situations. I was just watching this Lakota tribal leader talk about why men braid their hair. And it was a story, it was really beautiful about how they honor women. And the braids represent different parts of the Lakota tribe around the earth, around women, around children, and how women have this amazing power of giving birth. And I just thought, wow, this is so beautiful. Story needs to be echoed in this time and place, you know, around how women are being treated right now in so many realms. So if I can keep contributing in those areas, that's what I want to do. One of the areas that is really important to me is hearing women's stories. I continue to go to events where conferences is still many men speaking. I attend diplomatic meetings, many white men sitting around the table, watch the news, it's many white men, and there's still a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to
Well, I've had now 5 sets of chills running down my body. Speaking of you, I was like, wow, you're making me have physical reactions. Thank you for sharing your story and what strength and power as a 6-year-old to be an advocate at that age already for yourself, for others, and that has continued on. I mean, an event like that can be so traumatic and we can get stuck, right? And stuck in almost in that victim. And you have allowed this to fuel your personal mission almost. That the thread that I've seen throughout your entire career of, and I think you use the right word, is being that advocate for others and hearing their stories and then bringing out people's voices through the different books that you've written. And you mentioned that as well, is that you're trying to take yourself out of it, right? It isn't about you. And maybe you don't agree with the way they've written things, for example, but you're really, truly trying to let their message, their voice be heard. And what another beautiful story you've given us about the Lakota tribe and what I would say almost this honoring of women that we don't see very often. And it's beautiful. I like that. I wish we could have more stories around the honoring of women. From the leadership summit that I just came from, one of the participants shared a very short clip of Trevor Noah, who honors Black women because he says he's where he is because of Black women. It's also so authentic. It's so humbling. It's these advocates that have been in his life and that have helped him be where he is today. And he recognizes that, he acknowledges it. You being a woman and doing this for other women, including myself, the number of times I've called you and we've chatted and you've listened to me and you've suggested resources and things like that. It's been so precious. And so you do it informally, you do it written, you do it by talking to people, you do it by listening. So thank you for all the work that you do to lift other people.
Thank you.
I think that's astounding. It's beautiful. So I'm recognizing another beauty in you, Deb, I guess.
Thanks,
But I think,
Karen.
yeah, there's not that many people that do this time and time again and over again. And you built a life around it, which I think is incredible. So I know it's not really part of the 3 values you've chosen, but it's maybe it's related to the ethics part, but that choice of being the activist, of being the advocate is so powerful. How do you think you went from, or to not to be silenced like so many other people, and instead to switch it to being the advocate? And this is interesting too. I'm making a link to your value of being humble, where you're actually listening and you're not talking about yourself. And here you are talking and you are saying your truth and you're making people listen. How do you go to that role of advocacy and not staying silent in victimhood?
So this might give you a chill.
Okay. Ready.
I mean, when I think about it, past year, my mom died, and taking the death doula class helped me get to next level with just being truthful with really myself and advocating for myself. You could even tie that into some humility that, in families, there are taboo subjects, secrets, and clearly there were in my family. But one of the things before she died, because she had polio and she eventually died of the polio system robbing her muscle systems. She's very religious, and I felt that I needed a reckoning with some truth with her about the family member that she knew had raped multiple family members, because she kept secrets around it. And level, I did want an apology that she didn't protect me as a child. And I didn't want a forced apology, if that makes sense. I wanted her to acknowledge that this happened. And because when I came to her, it got taken care of, but we didn't see the person for a while. But then the family member came back in our lives when I was in middle school. And I never understood why around it. So I felt like we had to have this conversation before she died around it. And she apologized, and she did not realize she never apologized. So for me, it was a real, I don't know how to explain it. It was a real cross pathing of, I need to stick up for myself. I need to let my mom know. I know she loved me, but she also failed me in not protecting me, which in my opinion is the number one thing as a mother I have to do with my own children. I watched like elephant videos of mother elephants protecting their babies, and even like lions bringing their cubs to like a group on a jeep, like to protect the cubs from other animals killing the cubs. I kind of like those things because I know that sounds really weird, but for a while I was watching these videos and I was like, that's it. She didn't protect me in the end, or my siblings. I know she loved us, but it was something that, I don't know. You were asking for a particular time and place where I needed to come to those crossroads around advocating, around humility, around acknowledgement, and also showing some heart, some love around it.
Yes, I got chills again. Deb, thank you for being so authentic and sharing again your story. That's very powerful. It's very vulnerable. But what beautiful lessons we can all learn from you sharing this. And a sentence that really stood out to me was, I wrote it down, is being truthful with myself. And that comes back to, I think, our theme of living a life that's according to your values. So when we are not being truthful, we are disregarding a part of ourselves. We're pretending it's not there, or maybe others are pretending it's not there. And this is what I think was so strong about you, is that you, even in these circumstances, you're recognizing, kind of going back to your ethics. This was right and this was wrong. She loved us. We should protect us. Joke about that. I am going to stand up, and I'm going to stand up for others as well. I guess to end our conversation today, and I know we're going to have many more because I feel like we've just scratched, the tip of so many other interesting themes. What advice would you have for anyone listening to this where they do feel there is some disconnect between the way they're living their lives, whether personally, professionally, and the values that they hold? What advice would you give to them to try and bring those things more aligned?
I would say in those quiet moments when you are taking a walk, I don't know, having a cup of tea by yourself. I think, unfortunately, society really honors cognitive dissonance. And I think it's important when you recognize that you're in that cognitive dissonance, you're trying to tell yourself, you're almost gaslighting yourself around something like, well, it's okay, it won't happen again, or putting something off when it's hard for you. It's important to take a breath, to take a breather, think about, do I need to conquer that? Or what would make it lighter for me right now? And I think that's really important. I especially see a lot of leaders and this level of just female and the importance of taking time for yourself. I said this earlier, but I'm putting a plug in here for Sidecar Summit, but the conferences, the leadership retreats have been very intentional and helpful, gathering small groups of women to talk about some of these things. And the women that have struggled with it, I have found actually it's been a boomerang where they've come back and talked to me pretty significant issues they've had in their life. And taking that one step of having the ability to recognize that this is something I need to pay attention to instead of shy away from.
I'm hearing you say a couple of things. Number one, how important quiet moments are. right? Kind of
Yes.
get out of the noise, because in the noise and in the business on the treadmill, we can't be present for what's going on with ourselves, let alone with anyone else. So going back to that
Yes.
idea of being fully present, to find those quiet moments, to be able to reflect. And again, kind of going back to what you said earlier about being then truthful and honest with yourself and acknowledging whatever is going on that you may be avoiding or that you may be feeling a bit stuck on. And then I would say the third one is find support, whether it's a
Yes.
community, whether it's other women, whether it's through coaching or the Sniker Summit that you and I are going to be doing together in Cambodia with Bridget, to create these moments of reflection. It does definitely help. You could do it by yourself, but it also definitely helps to do it with other people, because through their questioning, through their powerful listening, through their presence, they can recognize the strengths that you have that maybe you've forgotten that you've had. So it's also not only maybe thinking about the areas where we get stuck, but also the areas where we can grow and glow and thrive, and relating it back to our strengths. So that helps us then realign with our values. Thank you so much for all your wisdom, for sharing your story, sharing yourself with us today. I weren't just leader, writer, mom. You were you Deb. Like there's no adjective. It's just you came today as Deb. Thank you so much for
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you know anyone who might enjoy listening, please share. I'd love to connect with leaders and other professionals who are looking to align their life and work with their values to live a fulfilled and balanced life. Till next time.